Well, as you might be able to tell, my first round of Kraken gear finally showed up, and while I do have to admit this sweatshirt isn't necessarily my normal style, at this point anything that says Kraken on it, I'm all about. By the way, at some point if you find yourself enjoying this video for some reason and you like to do that, that subscribe button is still down there. Now, as I talked about in my previous video, the first 30 players that the Seattle Kraken will be getting will come from the NHL expansion draft in the summer of 2021, but the next wave will come from that year's entry draft. And while admittedly, if you are watching this video in August of 2021 or beyond, some of the information in this video will be a little bit outdated, I figured now would be a good time to go over how the NHL entry draft that happens every year actually works, especially with a lot of people, especially in Seattle, just coming into the game now. Similar to how the NFL and as well MLB and NBA drafts work, the NHL draft starts with the teams who finished the worst in the previous season and works all the way down to the last pick being the team that just won the championship. And uses that same order for all 7 rounds of the draft in the NHL's case, not doing any kind of snake-style draft or anything like that. Now, if you are most familiar with the NFL's draft, or maybe the MLB's style of drafting, then the NHL does have one main difference, and that is, much like how the NBA draft works, the first few picks are determined by a lottery system. The NHL's draft lottery system, which was implemented for the first time in 1995, 10 years after the NBA added the lottery to their draft, looks fairly similar to how the NBA's draft lottery works. And while there have been some tweaks to it over the years, this is how it works now. The 15 teams who don't make the playoffs, which will become 16 once Seattle enters the league, are put in order from worst to best, or most mediocre, or whatever you want to call the 17th best team in the league. And then all of those teams are entered into the weighted lottery, with the worst team having the best chance to be selected, and the best team having the worst chance to be selected. And then the top 3 picks are chosen through the lottery system, with the teams who get those picks moving up to the top 3 slots, and all the other teams moving down, remaining in the same order that they were before. So just as an example, let's say that teams 3, 4, and maybe 12 get the first 3 picks. That means that they move up to the first 3 slots, and the team that would have had the first overall pick in a normal NFL style of system gets moved down to the 4th slot. So this does still mean that the worst pick that the worst team in the league can end up with is the 4th overall pick, and the worst pick that the second worst team in the league can end up with is the 5th overall pick, and so on and so on. And just in case you're curious, here's a table of the percent chance that each team in each position has at each pick. Although, once again, with this being said, these percentages will change slightly once Seattle enters the league, and there are 16 teams in this group instead of 15. And I suppose it's worth mentioning, while we're on the subject of Seattle anyway, that when it comes to the 2021 entry draft, which will be Seattle's first draft, they will be put into that 3rd slot and given basically the 3rd best chance at getting the first overall pick. Which also means that the worst that the Kraken can be picking is 6th. Now, of course, it is the hope of every NHL fan that their team is not a part of this lottery system, because that would mean that they've made the playoffs. I mean, I know as far as I'm concerned anyway, I plan to pay very close attention to the 2021 lottery, because that is definitely going to be the only lottery that Seattle will ever be a part of, which seems realistic. So then what about the teams that do make the playoffs? Well, for starters, they do all select after all of the teams that didn't make the playoffs, but then past that, it works like this. The teams are organized into what you can kind of think of as 5 groups, and then within each group, they're organized in the same way that the teams who didn't make the playoffs originally are, by going from least points in the regular season to most points in the regular season. The first and largest of these groups being the teams who don't make it to the conference finals and didn't win their division that season. The second being the teams who didn't make it to the conference finals but did win their division that season. Then the teams who lost the conference finals, then the team who lost the Stanley Cup, and then the team who won the Stanley Cup coming with the last pick. Alright, now that you perfectly understand how the NHL entry draft works, I'm totally kidding, you can leave any questions you inevitably have about any of that down in the comment section below and I'll be sure to answer them. Since you might have been paying a little bit closer attention this year, you might have noticed that there were 2 draft lotteries. And you would be correct, there were 2 draft lotteries this year, the first of which was particularly entertaining, at least from the outside anyway. And the reason for 2 lotteries this year is pretty much the same reason that anything happened in 2020, and that is COVID-19. Because of having to miss the end of the regular season, the NHL had to get a little bit creative with how they did the playoffs this year. And as you probably well know by this point, they decided to go with a 24-team style of playoff, with a 16-team play-in leading into it. This meant that the teams that were seeded 5 through 12 in each conference were pitted against each other in a 5-game series in a qualifying round, with the team that lost that series going home, and technically not making the playoffs. Because of this, 8 of the teams who would normally be part of the lottery were in this play-in round instead, and since they didn't know which teams would be losing the play-in round and become part of the lottery, they decided to do a first-round lottery that included the 7 teams who didn't even make the play-in round, and 8 kind of filler seeds or placeholders. Meaning that those top 7 slots were the teams that didn't make the play-in round, and those bottom 8 slots were the teams that would end up losing in that qualifying series. Now, if at this point you do remember how this lottery system works, it does mean that if those top 3 picks had just been one of the 7 teams who didn't make the qualifying round, there would have been no need for a second lottery system. But of course, as time came for that first lottery, they did tell us right up front that one of those top 3 picks was going to be a placeholder team. But little did we know what was going to come next. Yep, that's right. Not only did one of those placeholder teams get one of the top 3 picks, they got the first overall pick. Meanwhile, poor Detroit had to settle for the 4th overall pick. Now, we did later find out that it was Team E that got that first overall pick, which was the 12th team in the order, but it didn't really matter because they did announce going into all of this that they were going to do a second lottery with each of the 8 teams who lost the qualifying round having a 1 in 8 chance at that pick if one of the placeholders did get in those top 3. Now, inevitably, this led to fans exasperatedly joking around about how stupid it would be if one of the 5 seeds in Pittsburgh or Edmonton ended up somehow losing in the first round to a 12 seed and having a chance at that first overall pick. Especially with Pittsburgh already having 2 superstars in Crosby and Malkin, and Edmonton having the best player in the league in McDavid, and possibly this year's MVP, which is an entirely different player being Draisaitl. But then as we know in the play-in series, those jokes got closer and closer to becoming a reality as both Edmonton and Pittsburgh lost to their 12 seeds in 4 games. All of which meant that going into Monday's second draft lottery, there was a 1 in 4 chance that either Pittsburgh or Edmonton was going to get that first overall pick, both of which already being very good teams that would have solidly made the playoffs without the season ending short. Fortunately for the NHL, their PR team and Gary Bettman's email inbox, that first overall pick ended up going to the Rangers, which was a team that was an 11 seed in that qualifying series and was outside of the playoffs when the season ended anyway. But I will say this, it did make those qualifying series just that little bit more entertaining, knowing that whatever team was losing was getting that much closer to the first overall pick. Anyway, whether you're a new fan or maybe a returning fan, I hope that this video might have helped clear up some of the questions that you have about how the NHL's entry draft works, and if not, leave those down in the comment section below. Oh, and before I forget, for you new fans, there's one more thing that you absolutely need to know about the NHL's draft lottery in particular, and that is that it is always rigged for either Pittsburgh or especially for Toronto. Alright, well with that said, once again, we have reached the end, so if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like this video, do hit that like button down below. If you did enjoy it, do think about hitting that subscribe button. Otherwise, I hope to see you next time. Stay safe out there, and be good to each other. Peace!